Hi Vincent, how are you?
Hi, how you doing?
Great. Can you tell me a few things about yourself?
Well, about myself, I am an old sailor who's been around for quite some time. For the last 40 years, I've been sailing the seas of the world. That's been my pleasure and occupation.
That sounds good. Sailing is very interesting. Can you tell me an interesting story you have?
Well, there are endless stories. You would need quite a bit of time, but I can tell you about a current one that I'm working on, which is possibly going to be a very interesting one.
And what is it about?
Well, it's we are making a voyage this July to a mythical island off the west coast of Ireland, an island called Hy-Brasil.
Oh, I heard about that. Is there a legend about it?
Yeah, it exists. Hy-Brasil has existed in Irish legend and folklore for thousands of years, possibly. It goes back into the ancient mists of time. So it has a long history. But in recent years, it has come back into public consciousness.
Why is that?
Well, it's very interesting. It's all to do with UFOs and or what do I call them now? UAPs, but as most people still know, UFOs. So there was it went back to an incident in England in 1980 when there is a place on the east coast of England in Suffolk, a place called Rendlesham, a small village, and there is a forest beside it, Rendlesham Forest. And at the two ends of the forest there was two naval bases, an American base and a British base. And this was back in 1980. And at the time, it was late in the year, in December, people started seeing very strange lights over the forest, and nobody knew what the hell they were looking at. And the Coast Guard was reporting it, local people were reporting, local residents, and the two bases, they also were reporting these things. They thought maybe the other side are doing something, but both of them said that they weren't doing it. And so this went on for several days, and finally they thought that something had crashed into the forest, and they weren't sure if it was a civilian aircraft. So the Americans sent in a bunch of soldiers into the forest, and a guy called Sergeant Peniston and his small group of soldiers, he was a young American sergeant at the time, he came across an area where there was a lot of broken down trees, limbs were broken off the trees, and he came into a part of the forest where there was he came across a very large metal object that was hovering in the air, and it had no landing gear, there was no antennas on it, it was very unusual at the time for him to see this, and he had no idea what it was changing colors, and but he had a feeling that there was something wrong, that it was in trouble or something like that, and he came close to it. When he got close to it, he saw that there was all these hieroglyphics all over the body of it, and he reached out to touch it. And when he did, he got zapped with the other guys said that he became a white light for a second, and he himself just felt a surge of energy. And after that, he went into a trance, and he was in a trance for several days. And while he was in the trance, his head was filling up full of binary code. This was 1980, so there wasn't a lot of binary code around in those days. But he kept seeing this very vividly in his head, and he started to write it. And he ended up writing 16 pages of this code. He was a little bit embarrassed by the whole thing because he was a young sergeant, and he thought that if he tells anybody about this, he could get in trouble. So he took the notebook and he put it away, and time passed. He always maintained that he had an encounter with something. He doesn't know what it was. He doesn't know if they were extraterrestrials or if they were possibly time travelers, which is what he actually thinks they are. And but he was on a television program many years later, and he was telling, it was a program about paranormal phenomena, that type of thing, and he was telling people what happened to him, and he told them about the notebook, and they said, okay, we want to see the notebook, and so they took the notebook and they fed the code through a computer, and the computer spat out a whole bunch of coordinates. It deciphered the code and came up with a whole set of coordinates. And the coordinates were very interesting. There was a very prominent coordinate at the top and one at the bottom, but the rest of the coordinates were for places like the Nazca lines in Peru, the pyramids in Giza, the Temple of Apollo in Greece, where else was there? Was some place in Mexico. There was, but the key coordinates were the first coordinate and the last coordinate, and they were both for a location off the west coast of Ireland, and it so happens that location is where this mythical island of Hy-Brasil had appeared on the charts for 500 years, right? Because Hy-Brasil was charted from 1325 right up to 1860. People believed it was there.
Yeah, but it wasn't charted at the same place all the time. So